For the better part of a century, the relationship between the United States and Iran has defined the Middle East, often by breaking it. And it's a story we think we know, right? It's a simple battle between good and evil. But what if that's not the real story? What if the country we call the world's biggest destabilizers is also somehow a pillar holding the whole region up? To figure that out, we have to go all the way back to the beginning.
And that beginning? Well, it starts with an official admission. This isn't some conspiracy theory. These are the words of a U.S. Secretary of State on the record. This was, you could say, the original sin in the modern U.S.-Iran relationship. A deeply flawed start that would poison the well for decades to come.
You have to remember, right after World War II, America had very clear goals for the region. Stability, first and foremost, to keep the oil flowing, and to create a firewall against the Soviet Union. Democracy? Well, that was a nice idea, but it came in a distant second. The problem was, this directly smashed into what was happening on the ground in Iran. This huge wave of nationalism, this deep, powerful demand to control their own resources and their own future. So the CIA stepped in and launched Operation Ajax. And you know what? It worked, at least in the short term. The popular prime minister was out, and the Shah, who was very friendly to the U.S., was back on the throne with absolute power. America got what it wanted. But in doing so, it planted this seed of resentment that would just grow and grow for the next 25 years, teaching an entire generation of Iranians that America wasn't a friend of their freedom, but the enemy of their sovereignty. And then, all that simmering resentment just exploded. In 1979, the entire world shifted on its axis. And look how fast it happened. This wasn't a slow burn, it was a political avalanche. What started as one protest in one city cascaded into a full-blown revolution that, in just over a year, completely swept away thousands of years of monarchy and created something the world had never seen before, the Islamic Republic. And just like that, the entire foundation of U.S. policy in the Middle East, the Shah, America's guy in the Gulf, was gone. The golden age was over. Finished. The country that had been a key ally, basically a client state, had transformed overnight into its polar opposite, a revolutionary, ideological enemy. And if you want to understand the why behind the U.S. Embassy seizure, this quote from one of the students to one of the hostages, it says everything. In their minds, this wasn't some random act of terror. It was payback. It was the bill for 1953 finally coming due. As far as they were concerned, the U.S. had held their entire country hostage for 25 years. So for American foreign policy, the shock of the revolution and the hostage crisis forced a total reinvention. The old playbook was useless. A new mission was born, and it was pretty simple. If Iran can't be controlled, it has to be contained. If it won't be an ally, it has to be isolated. And if possible, it must be weakened. But remember the timing. This was the post-Vietnam era. America was still reeling from that war, and there was absolutely zero public or political appetite for another major conflict in some faraway country. So, in a way, the U.S. refused the call for a direct fight. Instead, it chose a different path, a long, grinding shadow war fought with economic sanctions, covert ops, and by propping up Iran's enemies in the region. And this new strategy basically draws the massive fault line that, you could argue, still defines the Middle East today. You've got two camps. On one side, you have revolutionary Iran, trying to export its ideology. And on the other, you have a U.S.-backed bloc led by the conservative Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and a very worried Israel. All of them now united in a struggle to stop Iran's influence from spreading. Now, what's so important to understand about this Saudi-Iran rivalry is that it's not some ancient, eternal religious war between Sunnis and Shias. It wasn't inevitable. It was ignited by the very specific, toxic brew of what happened in 1979. At its core, it's a modern fight for geopolitical power, a competition for who will lead the region, with both sides using and distorting religion to get what they want. For more than 2 decades, this very tense balance of power kind of held. And then, 2003 happened. Think about the incredible irony here. The U.S. invades Iraq to show its strength, to reshape the Middle East. But in doing so, it takes out Saddam Hussein, who was one of Iran's biggest and most brutal enemies. America accidentally eliminated the single greatest barrier to Iranian expansion. It created a massive power vacuum, and Iran was right there, perfectly placed to step in and fill it. America had walked right into a labyrinth of its own making. So, trapped in this new reality that it helped create, the U.S. basically doubled down on its strategy of indirect warfare. And that's given us the last 2 decades of this shadow war, a conflict fought with crippling economic sanctions,
incredibly sophisticated cyber attacks, the targeted assassinations of scientists and generals, and the quiet funding of opposition groups.
And as we talk about all this, we have to make a really important distinction. It's so crucial to remember. The government of Iran is not the same thing as the people of Iran. When we paint 88 million people with the same brush as their leaders, we fall into a really simplistic and dangerous us versus them trap. And if you need proof of that distinction, just listen to the words of people inside the country. This is from an activist named Sepideh Golian, who wrote about putting on a play while she was locked up in the infamous Evin prison. I mean, think about that. That small act is such a profound expression of resilience, a manifestation of hope that proves there's a vibrant, creative, human society that exists completely apart from all the geopolitics. Okay, so this brings us to the absolute core of this whole thing, the question we have to grapple with. We are taught to see Iran as the problem, the source of all the instability in the Middle East. But what if that's only half the picture? What if it's also acting as a structural pillar? And if you kick it out, the whole roof comes crashing down. So let's just play that out. Imagine the US gets what it wants. Let's look at two victory scenarios. Scenario A, the regime collapses from the inside. You could see a horrifying civil war, with ethnic groups like the Kurds and Baluchis trying to break away, and all of Iran's proxy armies running loose. Scenario B, it's destroyed by an outside military force. Well, you could see the Strait of Hormuz shut down, a massive war between Israel and Hezbollah, and the whole region just spiraling into chaos. Neither of those paths looks like peace. And this points to a really uncomfortable, paradoxical truth. For all the ways Iran causes instability, it also functions as a kind of stabilizer. It acts as the anchor for a huge network of Shia groups across the region. It maintains a very tense but somewhat predictable balance of power with its proxies. And it even serves as a known, predictable enemy for its rivals. And in the world of geopolitics, a predictable enemy is often better than total, unpredictable chaos. So the simple story is, you have to slay the dragon to save the village. But the much more complex and dangerous reality might be that destroying the dragon actually destroys the entire ecosystem it lives in.
Because here's the thing. The Middle East is structured by the rivalry of great powers. If you suddenly pull Iran out of that equation, you don't get peace, you get a vacuum. And that vacuum will be filled immediately by other ambitious powers, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Russia, China, all scrambling for influence, all creating new and potentially far more dangerous conflicts.
Which really leaves the United States with three incredibly difficult choices. Number one, go for total destruction and risk that catastrophic regional collapse we just talked about. Number two, just keep doing what we're doing and continue this costly, endless shadow war of containment forever. Or number three, try to find some kind of negotiated equilibrium, which means accepting that you can't just wish your rival away and you have to learn to manage the system as it is, not as you want it to be.
And this, right here, is the ultimate test. It's a fundamental clash between a core American myth, this idea that you can and must completely eliminate any threat, and the messy, complicated, frustrating reality of geopolitics, which often just demands that you manage a system of rivals you don't like. Ultimately, we have to completely reframe how we see the entire region. It's not a chessboard where you can just take pieces off the board and win. It's much more like a living thing, a complex, interconnected organism that is defined by a very, very tense balance of power.
So, I'll leave you with this question. If violently removing that one piece from the board doesn't actually bring peace, and in fact risks a much bigger war, then you have to ask yourself, is the real goal stability, or are we just inviting a new and maybe even more terrifying kind of chaos?